conversation with a whole lot of truth. The Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Page.
Hey everyone, this is Erin. Welcome to the Remedy Revolution. Today's guest is someone named Doug Lindamood. Doug, I met at a farmer's market actually down in San Diego when I was living in California. And he has quite an interesting story, which I'll let him tell himself, but he calls himself a self-confessed CFLLR or Siffler, a Christian fundamentalist libertarian lunatic rancher who practices obscure and bizarre ranching methods that are oddly enough great for the environment, the animals that live in it, and the people who consume the harvest it produces. I am so excited to have you on today, Doug. It's something that I've been passionate about for a very long time, actually since about 2007. I read The Omnivore's Dilemma and got familiar with Joel Salatin and all of his regenerative practices. So I'm excited to have this conversation about what it is that you do and how you can contribute to the remedy of the current situation going on in not only in our country, but in the world at large. So thanks for being here, Doug.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So can we go
go
back
ahead. I was
your...
just thinking about Omnivore's Dilemma. It's actually right here on the bookshelf because that's
Awesome.
kind of a staple of the whole.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have Polyface Micro, which is one of his newer books here on my on my shelf. So let's talk about this. So have you always been a rancher, and how did this kind of come about for you? What's your story?
Oh, well, gee, that's a long and sordid discussion. So we started, let's see. So I grew up on a cattle ranch. My parents didn't own one. I rode my bicycle out to work on one. And I started with just irrigating. It was a conventional ranch. I grew up in rural Oregon, so it was pretty normal to do that. To earn enough money to buy a car eventually. And I stayed at Richard's ranch. His name was Richard, at Star Valley Ranch for a number of years, all the way through college, because I ended up going to college near my hometown. And we never thought, I was a very conventional person, never thought once or twice about agriculture in terms of health and the relationship there until and I joined the Marines, and I was a Marine pilot for about just over 20 years. And near kind of halfway through my career, my wife ended up getting an autoimmune disease, and we decided that we were going to go with the unconventional method of healing rather than popping pills and all that sort of thing. We started looking at food and, what kind of food are we eating, and does it matter? And we found that the answer is, yeah, it really actually does. So we, at that time, were stationed in an area where we could actually be on a ranch, and we had all these farming and ranching skills. And we thought, you know what, it was a piece of cake to find organic salad, lettuce, and berries and that sort of a thing. But what we couldn't find was properly raised meats and proteins. And so we started basically, and this story is told on our website, and it's been read by a million people. And we basically started growing our own food. And we started with milk cows, and we started doing raw milk. Milk cows led to pigs because you end up with an abundance. And then we ended up with lots of cream and extra milk because a cow is very productive. A modern milk cow is very productive. And these were just Jersey cows. I milked 5 of them a day, morning and night. We had an opportunity to be on this really beautiful couple 1,000-acre ranch. We leased it for almost nothing. And I was going to school at the time as part of my master's degree. And we just started basically feeding chickens and pigs with milk byproducts, and then we ended up with this great egg harvest, and one thing led to another, and we're pretty soon we had more than we needed, way more than we needed. So we started selling it to our neighbors, and that was the beginning of Sunrise Ranch and Sunrise Operations. And that was 13 or 14 years ago now, and we've now got a couple operations in California. We have a Wyoming ranch that does regenerative agriculture training and internships. It's also a guest ranch. We have a small restaurant on that ranch, and we actually serve stuff that we grow on the ranch to local community and tourists and that sort of thing, because we're right next to Yellowstone, so that turns out to be really good. And we just keep, it's just one thing after another. We just keep expanding and growing, and it's a very productive way of ranching, regenerative agriculture. So you end up being very profitable and productive by default. And we have sort of a weird cult following, which is fun. We got people all the way from San Diego to Wyoming that follow us, and we've had visitors on the ranches that have come from all over, even Europe, to visit us. So it's been pretty neat, pretty wild adventure. I would have never thought that this would happen. I retired from the Marine Corps, became my full-time job, and I'm currently writing a book called The Accidental Rancher, which actually makes sense. How one guy becomes, go from Marine pilot to, I was just digging a ditch the other day. So, figure that one out. Yeah. So that's our story in a nutshell.
Yeah, I love that so much. So, obviously there was the health component when it came to, what you wanted to do to help your wife.
Right.
But so for those who are uninitiated, how
Mm-hmm.
does your way of, sustainable ranching, farming, having the cows eat grass, which they are intended to eat, all of those things, how does that help, not only, the local community, the environment? I- what would you say to somebody who might say, advocate for like a vegan diet in lieu of something like this? I know that's a loaded question, but
Yeah, it is. And actually, so I've found that the vegans and the vegetarians, and we've had just tons of conversations. Two components to that is, so first is, if I get a chance to talk to them, I can explain to them what we do and how that's different. Because a lot of those are, we find that we have all these overlapping concerns. I am what I call iconoclastic. I can offend my rancher buddies as easily as I can offend someone who's a vegan or a vegetarian. I have that skill. I can make everybody angry. But what's unique about it is that I share a lot of common ground. I wear a cowboy hat, but I'm an environmentalist. So those two terms are almost never used in the same sentence.
Right.
I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan, but I care deeply for my animals. They're almost kind of a part of our family. Yes, we eat them, but we were intended to do that. So that's a very natural and normal thing. We give them the very, very best life we can give them up until the point that we harvest. And I like to say that they live one great life and have one bad moment. But don't we all? And in reality, you can be as vegetarian as you want, but your stomach holds over 1 billion microbes that are currently devouring each other, and that's not vegetarian.
Right.
So we span kind of, we sort of, I used to joke around that if you could run a political platform on regenerative agriculture, you'd be elected everywhere, because you're equally popular and hated by all. So everybody has a problem with something we do, but everybody can also have a chance to kind of to come together, and if you can get a reasonable discussion underway, you see a lot of progress in that area. I think I might have wandered off a little bit. The question originally was, what would you tell somebody? And so the second part to that answer is that I wouldn't actually. I would just demonstrate. We don't do rancher evangelism. We don't do outreach and that sort of thing. We just ranch and farm regeneratively, and we just let people watch. And inevitably, we as humans have a way of understanding what truth is. We just kind of look at things and go, gee, that makes a lot of sense. Whether or not it meets my political platform, or whether or not, my neighbors agree with me, or my kids think that's great. I just look at things. A lot of times we just look at things and go, that's a pretty decent idea. Whether I admit that to anyone else or not is a different story. The difference in regenerative agriculture, sustainable farming, that sort of thing. And I tend to use regen ag because it really captures, it's a holistic approach, right? So when we talk about where we're going to move the cows on the ranch, for example, we interact that with not just, is it profitable, is it healthy for the cows, but what does that do to our 100-year plan to restore the creek, right? How does that affect the microbes that those cows are actually walking on top of, that are actually part of the ecosystem that they're feeding from? And if we don't look at that entire structure, if we just look at one thing, we can in fact be successful, but only for a limited time. And our kids will pay the price for that, or the next generation will pay the price for that. And the ranch we're on right now in Wyoming is very typical of that. It was a conventionally run ranch. They ran it conventionally for over 100 years, and the creek is deeply eroded. The ecosystem was absolutely collapsing. There were no bugs. Why? Because there were chemicals everywhere. Bugs can't survive you don't just kill a weed that you don't like, but you kill the bugs that are around it and all the microbes that are in the soil. And it's been amazing, because in the last 3 years, just since we started, and it takes about 3 to 5 years to see difference in a regenerative agriculture regeneration, the place has come back to life. Remember the first year we were here, the turkeys came back. Well, why did the turkeys come back? Well, because there was something to eat, right? It wasn't just a modern wasteland with a scorched earth grazing policy to make sure we got cows out the door. And that's, by the way, that's completely understandable. And I'll, this is kind of one of the reasons ranchers hate me, is that it makes perfect sense. I mean, if your granddad taught you, your dad taught you how to ranch and farm, and that's what is profitable, well, you kind of sometimes don't have much of a choice to do that. You can't just take your cows off for a year and let the land rest, which is what we just recently did on this ranch. And the point of that is that if you look at that whole picture and converting over, it can be very painful. It can be very difficult. We happen to be really good at it. But it's still, there are days where we go, man, this is really tough, because in regenerative agriculture, you don't just focus on the hoof up, which is what a conventional rancher might do, right? What do I do to get cows, to get calves, to make them go to market, to get my money, to pay my bills, which is all very reasonable. But we look at everything from the hoof down. We say, what do we do to grow the microbiology? How do we increase organic matter? What are we doing to feed the plant nutrients so that if I have a healthy ecosystem, I get the cows thrown in for free?
Right. Yeah, I think that's so important. So often, unfortunately, the food system, the USDA and all of these regulatory agencies are really set up for this very big box kind of system when it comes to food, big food, big ag, and all of these things. And so, I think most of the time, vegetarians or vegans who are advocating for that kind of a lifestyle are doing so because they're seeing the atrocities of what that kind of a model really creates. Yes, it creates more pollution. Yes, it creates sicker animals. Yes, it creates sicker people, as a result, all of those kinds of things that, if we were able to convert some more of these, maybe more traditional ranches into a regenerative model, we're looking at a completely different picture of, how that contributes to not only, the health of our people and our planet and the animals themselves, but we're like you said, bringing things back, not, so it's not just this idea of a better system than what is existing right now, but we're even creating an increase in the flora and the fauna, more environment for wild animals to survive, those kinds of things that I think is very short-sighted in a lot of ways in the traditional model. One of the things you had talked about, and I know you've been very passionate about not utilizing antibiotics in your animals, but one thing that caught my eye a while ago, because I followed you for a long time, was your discussion about mRNA in meat. So can you talk a little bit about what is going on within the community as far as pharmaceuticals being given to some of the animals, and what we need to look out for as consumers in order to avoid some of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most important thing I think about this is that what your previous comments actually feed into to this detailed question about mRNA. You say to yourself, well, how is that possible? I'll give you an example. When we started regenerating on this ranch, it was run, we had 50, they had conventionally, they ran 53 head of cattle here. Our first year we had 135. The next year we had close to 200. We expect to have 400 in 5 years. The point is that when you run large numbers of animals like that, the ground and the soil reacts in a certain way. We go every 3 months, once a quarter, when it's not snowing. We'll go through and we'll do a plant recording. And we actually started with about 17 species on the ranch. We're now at about 28. And just last year, we saw shepherd's purse for the first time, and we were so excited. My son-in-law that runs this with me, he's not he's more of a managing partner. He doesn't really participate in the day-to-day stuff, but he does the apiary and some of the other gardening stuff, but he's a plant nerd. And so we were out, he came over to my house. They live right next door, and he comes over and he's like, dad, you got to see this. We got shepherd's purse. And I was like, you're kidding me. So, we run down there practically in our pajamas, and we're just excited, and it starts raining, and we show up at the doorstep just before nightfall. And my wife looks at us and goes, you guys are such a bunch of nerds. I'm like, no, you're not going to believe this. We found shepherd's purse. My point is this: we had seen an emergence of a grass that was dormant here for perhaps 100 years or more. We don't know. The seedbed is dormant. And so what happens is shepherd's purse comes up. If you don't know anything about it, look it up sometime, Google it. It's pretty neat. But it has all kinds of healing properties for humans. Well, if it has that for humans, then what do you think it has for cows? And how do you think they know that, right? Like, so they'll graze that only at certain times and for certain reasons. And so they understand the salad bar that's before them way more than we think. Even our wildest scientific dreams, we don't understand what these things are doing for animals. All that's to say that when we start managing the ecosystem properly, it responds to the animals that are grazing from it. That's very important. Now, we always talk about the teeter-totter when we're teaching these sort of things. The teeter-totter is the ruminant. It could be a water buffalo, cow, bison, whatever, and the grass ecosystem, the perennial grasses, and they're either side of a teeter-totter, and they balance each other. There's a symbiotic relationship that's occurring there. So what we find is that as the ecosystem is treated properly, becomes more healthy, responds back to the cattle then respond to that. And so over time, our herds that are perhaps genetically dependent on all kinds of needle injections have now stopped becoming dependent on that, because they're starting to heal themselves from a natural ecosystem that provides and has provided for thousands of years without us around quite successfully. The ability to keep that herd healthy, to make sure mama has plenty of good milk for her calves, all the things that are needed to make sure that you have a healthy ecosystem. And we find that you just don't, it's not that we're antibiotic. I mean, if we have a cow that's really down and gonna die, well, we're gonna treat her just like I would if I was in a chainsaw accident. I'd want the doctor to go, well, I know you're kind of a natural guy, Doug, so we'll just let you bleed out. No, dude, stitch me up. Gee whiz, right? We just don't eat that animal. It doesn't become part of our food production, and we use it very little. We do have an emergency supply here if we need it. What I'm talking about is we don't routinely use it. It's not a crutch for us. It's more like a bandage, if you will. And we understand that it's not something that you can do forever. And so over time, the whole herd begins to adapt genetically to the grasses around it, and it just doesn't need the antibiotics. As far as the mRNA is concerned, that's a very kind of savvy marketing term and usage of that, actually by the cattle industry. There are no mRNA, as far as I know, as of today, there are no mRNA devices that you can use for cattle. There's nothing approved for cattle. There is one for pigs, and that does make sense. We wouldn't use that. Nor would we eat anything that uses it. So the first issue is that there's nothing that actually exists. There's the threat of it, which has probably got everybody in a hype. And then the cattle industry in California recently, I believe it was the Cattlemen's Association, recently made a press release and said, well, we're not going to use it or something like that. Well, as soon as you say that, now everybody thinks, wait a second, if they're saying they're not going to use it, it must be in everything. And so now you're worried about drinking coffee, and you're worried about, should I eat this, piece of jerky, etc. It's not there yet. Could it be? Well, yeah, I mean, it could be. I wrote a response to somebody recently. I said, well, it's possible. Anything's possible. I mean, I wouldn't put anything above the government.
Sure.
So, I mean, is it possible? Yeah. Is it in use? Absolutely not. I think the bigger concern is, you might be chasing a half of a percent of people that would even use it. I think the bigger concern is, we're whistling by the graveyard when we go by 151,000 acre ranches that are abusing their ecosystems and washing out the streams, and we're losing 3 millimeters of topsoil a year. And when we're talking about, oh my gosh, we run after the mRNA thing, it's like, well, hold on a second. We got way bigger fish to fry. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, sorry, go ahead.
So our policy is that you only use antibiotics in a life-threatening situation. If you do, the animal has to be cold. And then, of course, we don't have any use for mRNA. You couldn't, if there's worry about transfer, you'd have to be able to track the mRNA went into an animal and then it went into the human and then it was digested. So for that to be effective, it's kind of a stretch, I think. First of all, the whole reason they have it and the whole reason they injected vaccines into people was because they had to put it inside the body, not inside the digestive system.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it was inside the digestive system, if you remember a few years back when the whole world was panicking and everybody was going through this, there was all this talk about, well, I remember watching TV and they're like, well, how are we going to get all this vaccine to everybody in the world and make sure it's frozen at just the right temperatures and gets injected? And of course, I didn't care because I wasn't taking the darn thing. So I was like, oh, that's a really interesting scientific problem. I'm sure they got a lot of people that are going to make billions on how to actually solve that. And we watched that unfold. And,
Right.
and I remember thinking, well, that's odd. Why don't they just mail everybody a pill? Well, because for whatever reason, they couldn't get that particular vaccine into people's digestive system and get them to absorb it. So it'd be a stretch to then think that, well, we could put it in a cow and then you could digest the cow and then somehow or another the mRNA would be inside you. I don't think so. I think your stomach's just going to eat that up and it's going to take its natural course. So
Sure.
now if they sneak into your bedroom in the middle of the night and poke you with a needle, I think you'll wake up. So, if they're going to do that sort of a thing, that's a different story.
Yeah. So, when it comes to what's going on in the, let's say, big ag, big food, kind
Right.
of, and their incestuous relationship with the government. So, what is it, obviously I see regenerative agriculture as being the number one solution for, so many of the issues going on. However, especially when you talk big game about climate change and everybody should drive an electric vehicle and that's going to solve the world's problems. I'm like, why don't we start with like food, like that would be a much better place to start. But
That's
so,
funny.
so why, what in your opinion would, be one of the remedies for, this hugely broken system? How can we, as consumers, and even as leaders and politicians and all of those kinds of things make a difference in make a dent really in this very corrupt system? How do we switch the narrative here?
Well, yeah, I mean, everybody has a different opinion on this. The big players in the industry, Joel Salatin and Gabe Brown and those guys all have a different approach. Just everybody's got a different approach. My approach on it is very small and segmented. We believe in changing the next generation. So we believe that you could have everybody in the world begging for regenerative ag, and if nobody's actually doing it, there's no way to supply them. So our focus, if you look at kind of what we focus on the next generation of ranchers. And we've got everything from a nonprofit here that works out of the ranch called Carbon Vault. They train disabled veterans, all the way to internship programs, to people visiting and becoming interested in ag, even if they're just growing their own food. Next month, I fly to Texas and I do a consultation on a ranch. And you say to yourself, wow, fly all the way to Texas, do a consultation on a ranch. That seems like a big deal. Get this, it's a family of 5. they are retired accountants and they don't know how the first thing about agriculture, but they just decided we're going to grow our own food. We need an expert. So fly them down here and, you know, figure out, tell us what to do. So we've done that all the way to you know, working with, doing training sessions with people online, that sort of a thing. Our focus is the next generation, the next generation, the next generation. And the reason for that is we think everyone's going to go to local food. We think everyone's going to say, I want to know my rancher, my farmer, et cetera. If you care, there are plenty of people that just want to go through the drive-through and get their meal through a window, and that's fine. But we think the people that actually care and know are gonna need that supply. And if there's nobody around, remember, we have spent an inordinate amount of time convincing perfectly capable, very intelligent, curious young kids that they're absolute failures if they don't go to college.
Yep.
And we wonder, we're scratching our heads wondering why there's kids at, you know, Starbucks with their wallet attached with a chain and pulling shots for $12 an hour, wondering why they have $140,000 in debt for a social degree. Well, it's because you were told you have to go to college or you're not successful, and there's no way you could ever make it as a rancher. And then, by the way, the average age of the rancher in America is 67 years old. We know, demographically speaking, once they get past 35, an average in the industry, that industry is in decline. So there's no one left to teach it. I mean, we have kids show up here and we'll go out to repair a fence and they've never used a screwdriver. You know, I just became a grandpa for the second time last week, and I think my grandkids already know how to use a screwdriver.
Yeah.
So my point is this: we have done a disservice by not training a good segment of our population, statistically speaking, that would have just been thrilled to be in the ranching industry. So we now have to play catch up with that. So we've got to get caught up. And if people are going to buy local food, there's got to be somebody that grows it. So I think the key for me, is training the local food producer on even a small scale. We get a kid here and we go, hey, listen, you know, you can start off by just raising chickens and you find your own market and you market directly and you'll be just fine. And you can make a living doing that. You'll be happy because you're doing what you want to do.
Right.
So I think we've made kind of a critical error in our production side. Joel is different on that. Joel does more of an outreach thing. If you look, there are always, you know, there's 20,000 visitors a year to Polyface Farm. Gabe Brown is on the other side of that. He's working with Nabisco and testifying before Congress and all kinds of really high level cool stuff. And so each of the industry kind of gurus, not that I'm one, just each of them kind of have their own little niche, and they're like, okay, we're going to solve the problem this way. I think that's just incredible. White Oak Pastures down in Georgia, they're building a whole city. They're just like, you know what, we're just going to build a production city. It's just, I mean, that guy's got, you know, thousands of acres. He's got his own processing plant. He goes, we're just going to make a utopia right here. And people come there on pilgrimages and buy their food, and it's just awesome. So we all have a different approach.
Yeah. And I think, you know, most of those approaches, though, can be very complementary, you know, without the education piece or the outreach piece, and people aren't going to find the spark of interest, right? So to go in there and to learn for themselves. So that I think is pretty interesting. You know, the one thing that struck a chord with me is you talked about, you know, this whole idea of the push for college. So I have a 16-year-old son. So, you know, we're kind of thinking about those kinds of things. And, you know, I just heard an interview with Mike Rowe, who talked a lot about
dirty jobs.
Yeah. He
great
talked.
guy.
Yeah, it was great. Really fantastic interview with Del Bigtree. And it was very interesting because he said, you know, we've lost so much of the nuts and bolts of, you know, figuring out what it is to be an adult. Like, you know, in high school, we don't teach, you know, home economics. These kids don't know how to cook a meal. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to, you know, and we've become more and more and more dependent on, you know, running to the grocery store, for example, or, instead of being able to be sustainable at home in any sort of way. And so I do think that a lot of that can begin just in your own backyard. We had chickens for quite some time, backyard chickens, because I thought, well, if this is the way, one of the ways I can do my part, and learn something new and learn a new skill, then, it's small, but it makes a difference to me,
Yeah, exactly. Well,
So,
we had an internship here. This it just ended recently, and so it was 90 days, and they show up here, and they're college undergrads. Many of them are college undergrads. And I remember so the way we run the internship is there's a commercial kitchen here with a dining facility, and then there's small cabins where they all share cabins like a dorm room. And so we went over the cooking schedule. Okay, so team A is going to cook. So halfway, I don't know, early in the afternoon, you're out repairing fence. So team A leaves and they go back to the kitchen and they cook for everybody else, and then they have a communal meal, and that's how they do dinner here on the ranch, so that we don't have to hire staff to, we don't have to hire a full-time cook. And then they rotate. So team A, B, T, C. And then once a week they get together and they make their menu. Well, this young gal shows up, and she's from a sorority, and she's just really, really nice lady. And she goes, yeah, I've never cooked before. I go, well, how do you eat? And she goes, well, in my sorority, we have someone who does everything. And I said, well, welcome to the ranch. You're cooking and you're cleaning as part of your duties for, how to make it through life here.
Right.
And it was so funny because we did her exit interview, and I'll never forget. She sat down. I said, well, what was the top learning event for the summer for you? And she goes, the cooking. She goes, I'm really hooked on it. So I thought, you came here and you were doing artificial insemination on cows. You're building fences. We were building, erosion control devices. You're, butchering chickens, and you tell me the greatest takeaway from the ranch is cooking. And I'm thinking, you could have skipped the ranch for I mean, she enjoyed everything else and was really she's pre-vet, so there were some other things that were a top choice for her, but that was one of them. She was like, yeah, the cooking was really helpful for me. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Good. Well, I'm glad we could teach you something. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, it's a life skill, right? It's just one of those things you have to have, or you starve.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't remember what it was, but just the other day I heard somebody said, well, how did you learn to cook? And they were like, well, I got hungry.
Yeah, exactly. I was forced to. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But so many things that, we have really lost as a society when it comes to educating our young people. So I think that's really valuable. That you're starting them young and, training them in, really just life skills.
Right. Well, we've lost so much of these things, and one of them is the connection between the product and the food. When the kids come out, when I call them kids, when the interns come out and they butcher their first chicken, it all of a sudden hits home that this thing is giving its life so it can sustain you. That's a whole story right there. We could get into what that actually means. And I mean, you could just have hour-long discussions on that alone. A neighbor will call and say, hey, we need some help branding cattle. Bring your crew over. And so, at 4:30 in the morning, they're rustled out of their racks out here. We all pile in vehicles. You got your work gloves, and you go over and you work on this other guy's cattle ranch, given 100%, 110%. That's one of the things we require the interns. Hey, we don't give 100% here. We give 110%. And if you're ever not, you need to leave. It's hard work, and you're doing it for someone else's benefit. And then you leave, and they say, they feed you lunch, and you leave, and you come back to this ranch, and then, we only do that once or twice in a summer, but they go, man, that was so rewarding. Wait a second. Why was that so much more rewarding? Because you did something sacrificial and beneficial to someone else, and you didn't get a thing for it other than a lunch. Okay. And you're exhausted, and it took you 12 hours because you started at 4 a.m. and didn't get back till late at night. And by the way, you still have chores to do here. So you see them come through, and they're, 19, 20, 23 years old, never been exposed to anything like that in their lives. I mean, they met all the scholastic requirements. They got A's and everything. And, we're in band practice and all that stuff. But when you see them here and they're, their jeans are torn and they're dirty, they're sweaty from a full day's work, they go, wow, there's really something to that. And it's a powerful, powerful message that I think we love having kids come here that don't want to be in the ranching industry. They just want to make it in life.
Mhm.
And I go, hey, listen, pay attention for the summer and you will be successful as a bank, president, or as a working in this particular design industry, or as an electrical engineer. You'll do much better if so we really enjoy the internships because we get to pour into that next generation.
I think there's something so valuable in doing some kind of a manual labor. I think we've lost a lot of that. We sit behind desks all day, even in school now, there's not a lot of
Yeah.
outdoor play. It's,
Yeah.
very focused on, academia and what you can do with your mind, but there's so many valuable things that we can get from doing things with our bodies, like
Yeah,
digging a
absolutely.
ditch. It's
Yep.
there's
Yeah.
there's such a
And it's good for you.
self-awareness that comes from that. Yeah, I mean, physically,
Yep.
obviously, but like there's this very deep sense of contribution, I think, when you're actually physically doing something. I think it's just
Yeah.
different.
Well, and that's one of the things I love about my job is we have 4 companies. I've spent a lot of time doing exactly what we're doing right now. But I remember, I'll never forget, one day I went out and I was early in the morning. I was repairing a hydraulic system on a tractor, and then we gave birth to a calf. A cow was having trouble giving birth to a calf. That's always pretty magical. Then I did some regular chores. I came back in. I did SQL database because I was the only guy in the company that could do SQL at the time. And then I went back out, and I remember I got done at the end of the day, and I think I had done some accounting. We had to do some accounting on some stuff, and I had to and I remember I got at the end of the day and I thought, man, there's not a job in the world where you do that diverse. You might be an SQL expert, and that's excellent. We need those folks around. You might be a guy that gives birth to calves all day long, but having the diversity of the ranch has been. I mean, I'm 49. I feel like I'm 32. I mean,
Mhm.
it's just I in fact, there are a number of times where I think to myself, I'll be out there working, I'll go, doggone it, it's dark already. I still got more to do and still got, I mean, I come in and I go to bed at 10 o'clock and my wife I'm just buzzing with energy. I keep a notebook by the bed and I get up in the middle of the night and write some notes down. Hey, we really got to get this moved. And so my wife thinks I'm absolutely crazy, but that's why we say I'm a lunatic. So,
Hey, I don't know. Personally, I would far prefer to be a lunatic than a sheep. So,
well, it's exciting. And what happens is that ends up being contagious. And, if, I know when the interns come out, they're tired. It's long work days. It's hard work. It's exhausting, and it's all new. There's like, what you want me to go where? Oh, I need you to go over to this pasture, and you get, they get assigned to go out there in a truck that's a manual, and they look at that thing. And they're like, wait, why? There's 3 pedals on the floor. Yeah, figure it out. You'll make it. Don't worry. And 2 hours later, they're down the driveway. But yeah, we've had, it's a very exciting kind of progressive, always exploring, always new. And we put boundaries around. I mean, we don't hand them a chainsaw on their first day and tell them to run. I mean, there's safety and that sort of a thing. Micro's big on safety third, right? That's his favorite saying. There is safety, but you can be so safe that you don't get anything done. And that's
right.
kind of the paranoid world we live in. We're not like that here on the ranch. We got to get stuff done, and we understand that. So there's
Right.
a balance between risk and reward, but it's very exciting. It's very, very rewarding job.
Well, we are coming towards the end of our interview here. And as I do with all of my guests, I have 8 questions that I like to
Uh-oh.
ask everybody. So,
The dreaded 8 questions. I didn't look, so you told me don't look, and so I was like, okay, I won't look.
All
I
right. So,
couldn't imagine what they are.
rapid fire questions. Here we go. If you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Boy, that's a good one. Jumping in a hot spring. We have the
Nice.
world's largest mineral hot springs out here right next to Yellowstone, and that's just one of the nicest things you can do. It's all so relaxing.
Awesome.
Okay.
I'm ready to come visit. All right.
Okay.
Tell us something most people don't know about you.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Let's see. Most people don't know. Oh, Aaron, you're killing me. Maybe I should have prepared. Most people don't know. I have a math degree, but I'm not very good at it. How about that? I'm the most humble mathematician in the world. That's true. Most people don't know that. They go, "Oh, he's got a math degree. He must be really good at it." Actually, I struggle with it. It's really hard work.
That's
part of the
funny.
reason I'm a rancher.
If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
Oh boy, that's a good one. Oh boy. Oddly enough, so I'm a country guy, right? And I listen to country all the time, but the truth is don't tell anybody this. This is a secret. This is going out to millions of people. I'm a Swiftie. I really like Taylor Swift. My wife jokes, and that might go into like things people don't know about you.
Yeah.
We'll be sometimes when I get a chance to relax, she'll like put on music, and it's usually like country and that sort of thing, and I'll go, "Hey, honey, will you mix a little Taylor Swift in there for me?" So, not too crazy about her as a person, but man, I love her music. So something Taylor Swift. I don't know. One of the things from 1989. There you go.
All right, there we go. What's your favorite guilty pleasure?
I get up in the middle of the night and I drink a glass of milk. True story. Most people get up and it's like, okay, cake, ice cream, whatever. I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and usually it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. I'll get up, I'll go have a nice cold glass of milk. My favorite thing to do. Awesome. Guilty pleasure.
What's the most influential book you've ever read?
Oh boy, that's a really good one. Most influential book, it have to be the Bible. Read it a million times. Love it. 66 books. Yeah, 40 different authors, all one theme. And it just refreshes my soul. I read it every morning. Just love it.
You and Dr. Jim Meehan both gave me the same answer. So awesome. What does the word revolution mean to you?
Oh, change from within. Yeah, change from the lower levels. People becoming aware at the lowest possible level of society.
Yeah. What does the word remedy mean to you?
Revolution that takes action. Yeah. So you can be revolutionary. Hey, that's a great idea, and then do nothing about it. But remedy is when you finally put it in gear and you say, you know what? I think one of my favorite things, I'd like to support it's great to support local agriculture as you go to Walmart to pick up your big bags of groceries in the plastic. And you say, no, I want to support local agriculture. Where's the nearest farmers market? How do I get a hold of a rancher? That I think is remedy. Yeah. Were those good answers? Did I win?
Oh wait, one more.
I'm not going to make it.
If you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
Oh, it'd be to understand what nature's trying to tell you and not go against it. When we graze cattle, we actually look and see what they're doing. They're gonna tell us we're the orchestra conductors, they're the music makers, and they'll tell us what they need and where they want to go and what they need to do. And then if we can balance that with what we're trying to get out of our ecosystem, like a 100-year plan to repair the erosion on the creek, we've really fit our niche. So I would say, listen to what nature's telling you. Much of what we're dealing with is because we are trying to go against what nature is really mandating or prescribing for our lives. And we're just not following the prescription. And, you read all these problems. I've got this, I've got that. This is hurting me. This doesn't work. What is nature telling you to do? Just look at it's really, we've been around for a long time. It's going to work. Trust me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think several years ago, I said my life's motto is don't mess with nature. And nature knows, and when we listen, it's way more powerful. We are way more powerful when we listen to that innate calling that really is present all throughout the planet. So absolutely. Well, Doug,
you can hear it if you put your ear to the ground.
Yeah. Absolutely. It has been an absolute pleasure. Doug, you've talked a lot about all of these amazing programs. Where can people find you?
Oh man, that's always a tough question. We tell people start at sun-riseranch.com. That's an informational website. We don't try to sell you anything there, but those all feed into the other companies. There's 4 major websites. There's sun-riseranch.com has our blog. It has all of our information that people have told us there's enough written there. You could actually start a ranch. And it's kind of got our daily happenings. And then from there, if you want to buy stuff, there are links that get you over to Sunrise Ranch store. There's a link over to localbeef.com. There's There's regenagbnb.com, which kind of handles the guest ranch and the internship programs and all that sort of a thing. So you can go to one of the websites. If you just do you have to spell it right, SON-rise ranch. You can't put in SUN. You'll get, I don't know, some horse facility somewhere, which I'm sure is probably a great place. You could check them out too. But if you want to get to us, you got to go to SON-riseranch.com.
Awesome, Doug. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We hope you all enjoyed this episode of the Remedy Revolution. Take care.
With hope as a guiding light, through darkest days we'll fight the night. With a whole lot of passion, with a whole lot of truth, Remedy Revolution is here for you.